Welcome to Cloud Unplugged. I am here with Richard Pearson, Head of Engineering at Moonpig. We're going to be discussing a little bit about your background, how you kind of got into engineering, how you managed to kind of progress to Head of Engineering at Moonpig, platform engineering, all the terminologies and buzzwords and what it all means, but more about you and your career. I don't suppose you want to introduce yourself a bit as well.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Richard. I'm Head of Engineering at Moonpig. I look after Moonpig's enablement space, which includes sort of our platform engineers, our site reliability engineers, and people who generally make product teams' lives easier.
Right. And obviously we were chatting before about like kind of all your career progression, everything you've learned. How did you end up as a head of engineering at Moonpig?
I mean, it's where to start with this. I think it's probably worth sort of starting all the way back at uni,
Right.
which is probably something we've not discussed too much. But I did a degree in artificial intelligence, which sounds great these days. But
Yeah, that does.
compared to what it was back then, which was basically a computer science degree with a couple of compulsory modules, it's quite different from the LLMs and everything we're seeing currently in the industry. So after there, I went, what do I do with an AI degree? I know computer games. That lasted all of 6 months before that was decided that was not my career. And then from there, I went to work for NCC Group as a tester, load testing networks and things like that. Before, again, 6 months straight out of uni, you never know what you're going to do, deciding that's not for me. And my friend at the time went, I'm working in tech support at Zen Internet. Why don't you come and join me while you work out what you want to do with your life? So I did, and then 14 and a half years later, I was still at Zen, having gone through working in tech support, their second line, moving into their development area, working for junior, mid, senior, lead, and then finally my last position there was a technical architect. So I was sort of doing leadership within the technical space. But when I was looking at my career and where I wanted to go with it, it was more a case of, okay, right, I'm here in technical leadership, but where do I want to go? And it's okay, right, realistically, now for me, I probably need to make that management switch. I need to take on more responsibility for a team. And unfortunately, at the time, Zen didn't really have what I was looking for. But I was quite fortunate. And again, a different friend in this case was I've been working for Moonpig for 2 years. Why don't you come and join us? There's an engineering manager role opened. And I went, oh, well, go on then. I'll give it a go on the interview process. And I was fortunate enough to get it. And from there, I've had a very fortunate career through engineering manager, senior engineering manager, and then head of engineering most recently. So
Nice.
It's been a bit of a whirlwind progression within Moonpig in my 2 years here versus 14 and a half years at Zen.
Yeah.
So
It was Moonpig, like, obviously I guess it must have been reasonably, because it's a British company, isn't it? It's UK based. Were they at the scale, I guess that was in 2020-ish? Or
2021. So
so
they'd already seen the massive growth through COVID and everyone unfortunately not being able to get out and buy greetings cards in the shops. So they'd seen a massive growth period through that COVID times.
Yeah.
So that was just before my time joining. But it was been interesting to see the scale, and especially the scale of online sales at Moonpig versus say somewhere like Zen.
Yeah, that is a switch.
It's
a retail.
very much a switch where you moving from sort of you're as a developer for an ISP, you're working in sort of producing the systems which support a customer, not the thing they effectively buy or use. It's all about supporting that service, where there's a recurring element to that sort of incoming fee every month, versus Moonpig, where someone buys a card, and then may or may not come back again, and the volume scale is completely different as well.
Yeah. So you studied AI. What was that like? As in, like, because you said it was obviously not like the AI we know today with LLMs. What was it like when you were studying it? Like, can you believe the difference between what you studied and where we are?
It's interesting because I think back then there was a couple of modules that I can remember. There was a computer vision module which I completely tanked, and I think was my lowest score of any module that I did. But that was very much that's almost like the precursor to Snapchat filters, or anything to do with that. So that's about edge location, finding where the edge of an image is within an image, the object within an image even. And then there was some natural language processing, but it was very basic, very sort of prologue. I can't even remember most of it. and then robotics, and that was literally just someone driving around. They had these thousands of pounds robots, which this day and age you can probably build with a Raspberry Pi and some stuff off AliExpress. So
wow, but then I guess was there not just the roles around? I guess 'cause it was so early AI.
So early. The only thing that was really there, that I could find was the computer games industry.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the AI and obviously what you'd expect from a computer game, be it, I think where I went to work for Codemasters. I was working on Colin McRae Dirt. So that was around, the other drivers on the track.
Right.
So, yeah, the only thing that I could really, or maybe it was naivety, maybe it was just not knowing what was out there, but that was sort of the thing in my mind straight out of university of this is the thing that I want to go and do.
Are you still interested in it? Like now it's progressed. Is that like something like you?
Oh, it's definitely, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's weird how things go round. So I'm now heavily involved in AI at Moonpig.
Oh, really? That's cool.
So yeah, even though people didn't know I had an AI degree, and I kind of rolled it out as a bit of a joke, but it's almost that I'm doing the AI stuff here. So
that's so cool. And you're like, what? I don't know if you can or can't talk about that, but like, what bit of it is like? As in like what a user would understand for the AI for them.
I think the easiest thing is the feature that we have live on the website. So there's a smart text feature. So if you're buying a greetings card from Moonpig, when you go to edit the inside message, there's a smart text feature. So you can click that and go, I want a message from my mum who likes golf, and it will write you a greetings card insert based on that criteria that you provided. And that just goes back onto, as you'd expect, ChatGPT, appropriate prompting, gives you a nice internal message for that card.
Nice, that's pretty cool. All right, so you've integrated into the ChatGPT bit. Oh, that's really cool. When was that kind of recent? Is that?
I think we released that towards the end of last year, I think it was. But yeah, the focus that I've mostly been looking at is more around engineering productivity. Yeah. So yeah, I wasn't directly involved in the release of that product, although I did support, obviously, from an infrastructure perspective, getting those integrations there. But yeah, from an engineering productivity perspective is where my focus has been in terms of, the likes of Copilot and any of those sort of completion tools and the
how do you make people
and
more
adoption.
Effective? And then I guess you started off doing AI, then somebody was working for Zen, so you were like, cool, I'll give it a try. What was your first role there?
Tech support. So I was literally, hello, Zen Internet Tech Support, Richard speaking, how can I help?
Yeah.
And it's, my internet is broken.
Yeah,
and
just switch it off.
Yeah, it was literally, have you turned it off and on again? It was, supporting customers on Windows ME with USB Wi-Fi sticks. Back then, it was those type of calls that if they came in, you were like, "Oh, I'm here for 2 hours," kind of thing. You weren't going to be quick.
Was it the business? Because they do business and obviously do they do residential?
They do B2C.
Well,
so it was the residential tech support that I was on the side of back then.
Oh wow! So then I guess did you learn a lot? As in that's like drivers, isn't it? Like very customer centric.
Yeah, and I think it's just that sort of, like you say, it's that customer centric. It's being polite and being able to talk to people and relate to people and sort of the frustrations that they have basically. I think from my perspective of moving through, so I went from technical support to what was called service support, which was effectively their second line support.
Right.
So that was more working on I did a lot of work on like the consumer routers back then. So configuring them and working out how to configure them. And alongside a good friend, we sort of built out what was effectively the automation platform for when you plug a router in. It's standard now. You plug a router in, it just works. But back then, it wasn't that. It was you get a router in the post and a big piece of A4 telling you how to get into the UI to put your username and password in and things. So that auto configuration platform based on the TR69 protocol, we built all of that out from scratch because back then in 2006, there really wasn't anything on the market back then. So it was before there was commercial offerings and the like. Oh, wow. So in service support, that's kind of the area I was working in. So from there, it was kind of a logical shift into our systems development area.
Right.
And taking on responsibility for maintaining that, especially when my friend left.
Was that like a little, how did you convince the business of like doing this? Was it something they endorsed, or were you a bit like, actually, to reduce all the support, let's just automate this, and then it's going to take loads of like constant, like the same questions we get all the time, let's just make this better?
I think it was that, and I think it was a little bit back at the time. This is 2006. There was a lot of shadow IT going on in the tech support area, as you might expect, of tech support trying to make their lives easier. So I think it was a combination of tech support going, this is a thing that we should do, and then there used to be like the ethos at the time with that tech support team was not call center based. I don't think it is still today, to be fair, but there used to be a case where if you knew that you could build something or do something which would make tech support of a customer's life easier, you could propose that as a project, and then you get project time. Yeah. So even as a call handler who's paid effectively to respond to tech support queries, you could get that time allocated to you to effectively build out that project that might help. So that's how it started with my good friend Tom, who was basically built it out as this thing exists. I don't know where the original idea came from. Yeah. And then it became obviously a bigger thing. It became a thing supporting actual customers. Then it's like, all right, maybe this should actually not sit in by some random tech support people in the tech support department. And then it was adopted by the development areas and supported through that way.
That's pretty cool though, because it's basically innovation, I guess, really inside of support.
It was driving innovation out through that tech support teams as well.
Just to make your lives and the customers' lives easier, because you were so close to it.
Yeah.
This is mental that we keep doing this. Yeah.
When you got the team leaders at the time sort of classifying these are all the types of calls we have. New setup calls were going to be quite high on that list. Yeah. So if you can cut that down, you've obviously got more time for everything else.
Yeah, that's cool. So then you made your way then from that into then system development.
Yeah. So through my uni career, it was a bit of a step for me, because through my uni career, I did more C++, Java. It was that type of course. But where Zen were in their system development area, they were .NET focused. Right. So it was a language that I'd never actually done before. So it was a big shift for me in terms of going in and having to pick up something new. So as a junior engineer there, I was then sort of shifting from it and sort of innovation mindset to more of a learning mindset of just getting used to this new technology type and all the other systems that I had in tech support no visibility of. But I think from tech support and working in that type of environment, and it goes the same way in terms of, if you've worked in a help desk, IT support, anything like that, you get that problem mindset. Yeah. And it was something I was advocating for during my time through that system development area, which was actually, when we get developers in, maybe we should actually go and make them sit with tech support for, shadow them, see where the customer problems are, because that sort of problem solving mindset goes a long way as a developer as well.
Yeah, like the empathy,
but also just the problem solving. Just this customer has a problem. How do I work through it? And we see it across the industry these days as well. And you coming from a DevOps background, that an alarm goes off. What do you do? Yeah. And it's having those sort of patterns in your mind of going, okay, well, I'll go and find, I don't know what this thing is, but I know this type of thing will exist. I'll go and find the logs. I'll go and look through the logs. I'll try and locate where the problem's coming from. Yeah. And it's quite easy, not quite easy, that's the wrong word. As an engineer, it's not necessarily something that comes part and parcel of somebody as an engineer. It's definitely a skill set that people develop.
Yeah, because I think it's a process of elimination. Yeah. In some ways, isn't it? So you're kind of working around to get to the root cause.
Exactly, it's root cause analysis.
And that is you're right, that is a different mind, because you've kind of got to rule things out, ask different questions, try different things until you kind of get to the bottom of it before you get to the kind of the fix. But I suppose from an engineering perspective, if you're writing software, it's all about integration testing and general testing, not so much general problem solving, unless you're kind of running, I guess, unless you're somehow on support as part of your team and then that kind of comes to you, then I suppose that's the only chance you're probably going to have to be forced to think about.
And I guess, and it depends, like you say, exactly how a company is structured in terms of that ownership of operational aspects. Yeah. So if you approach it from a you build it, you run it perspective, teams generally need to have that mindset, that skill set. But if you work in more of a separation between engineering and operations, then there is always that chance that actually that skill set exists within your operation teams.
When you were working there, were there people that you kind of admired when you first got into your career? Because I remember when I first, because I had this very similar, weirdly, very, very similar, went to uni, then ended up in an ISP doing support. So it's kind of very similar career route. But I do remember when I got there, like everybody knowing so much. And I was like, oh my God, everyone seems to, especially ISPs, weirdly, because it's a bit of a jack of all trades.
Very much, yeah.
And so everyone like knew switching, routing, networking, like literally everything. And then Linux and sysadmin and a bit of software dev. And you're like, my God, everyone knows so much about so many things. So was there people in there when you got there that you like admired and were kind of pushed where you're like, oh, I want to be like them? And
I mean, I'm sure there was at the time.
Yeah.
It's going back 15 years down, and definitely there's, I mean, throughout your career, you come across people who have a skill set that you go, actually, they can teach me a lot.
yeah,
And so I think it's always, I've always approached it from that perspective of, you know, I don't know, maybe it's just the way my mindset works. I've never thought I want to be them.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I've always thought about it from I want to work with them.
yeah, learn from them. almost.
Exactly,
Yeah.
learn from them. And many of you get the opportunity to have, you know, there's working with them, and then if you get that opportunity to effectively get mentored by them or shown how to do things, then that's obviously where extra value kind of comes in from it.
Yeah, it's a great ISPs, I think, because it's quite bare bones, isn't it? I suppose it's very low level. There's kind of a lot to learn from. I guess it puts the foundations in place before, like cloud, for example. Now, like most of it's abstracted, but you kind of understand all the principles of how things work and hang together, which I think is quite important when you build on, especially if you're troubleshooting, because you can kind of think about that stuff. So that must have helped a lot in your job now.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you say, something like as simple as DNS resolution is not a lot of things that engineers might consider, because it's not something they come across. But when you've configured a DNS server for how many times, you kind of grow to love-hate that type of thing. Yeah. So yeah, definitely I think you get that foundations that then applies to so many things.
Yeah. So then when you joined Moonpig and took that role on, what was the role?
Engineering manager.
So
it was engineering manager within our Tech Foundations team. Interestingly, it was our Tech Foundations London team, despite myself being in Manchester.
Right.
But that was I think that's the nature of remote and hybrid working these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was responsible for the team that managed quite a lot of the areas that, well, to be fair, all of the areas that I now manage with multiple teams, we only had 2 teams supporting, say, 5 or 6 areas.
Right.
So they had a lot of cognitive load in terms of different systems that they had to manage.
Right.
So we've grown that out from there to the team structure that we have today.
And how did you, why did you want to go into management exactly? Because obviously, what was it about? Was it just career in general, different challenges? Or?
Yeah, it was different challenges and career progression. You know, at the time, 2021, your focus is on, all right, I'm a technical architect, what I would do. And being a technical architect is absolutely fine. You know, if you're the type of person that's what you want to do and that's where you want your career to go, that's great. And it's a great role. I enjoyed it. But for me, it was a case of, okay, I have, if I think about a competencies tick list, I have all this technical leadership, I have all this actual development skills and all this support experience. But what I don't have is people experience. I don't have what one of my old managers used to call tea and toilet of the HR admin, you know, the actual just sort of knowing of and running of a team from that sort of policy basis type of thing. And so for me, it was almost more a case of that's experience that I want.
Right.
But I want experience of that in a environment or a team that it's interesting to me. Yeah. So that's why I was quite fortunate to land where I did within Moonpig.
Yeah.
So going from an ISP to what was Tech Foundations, that technical, as it sounds, technical foundations, that underlying infrastructure and everything that enables other teams was a really good fit for me.
Yeah. And how did you find then taking on the challenge of managing engineering? Because I guess there's managing people in general, which is the pastoral care thing, like you were saying. It's good one-on-one structure,
progression,
supporting that stuff. But then there's the building of a team.
Yeah.
is quite obviously nuanced and different for the requirements of the business and things like that. How have you found that challenge? Did you, because obviously you would have inherited as well.
Yep.
So was that easy or was it difficult?
Quite fortunate that my predecessor, who was my boss at the time, he built out a very good function.
Right.
So I have been probably found it. No, I'm not going to say it was easy, but I have a good base to build upon. Basically, you know, recruitment at Moonpig is very good at finding good people. So I've been quite fortunate in that regard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think moving to that sort of, like you said, that pastoral care of looking after people and growing, I think that's the challenge that I needed at that time. Because, you know, if I could say from a technical leadership perspective, but as a technical leadership, as a technical architect, you were working with teams and trying to steer them. Technical architect at Zen was quite analogous to a principal engineer.
Right.
So it was kind of cross-cutting concerns and steering multiple teams to a common goal rather than ivory tower, here is your design kind of thing. So for me, when I moved to be an engineering manager of a single team again, it was almost like going back to being a lead engineer, a lead developer, because in that space I'd operated with a team of multiple people, and although I didn't have line management capability with them, it was steering them toward a common goal and sort of, you know, getting that buy-in. So it was almost like there was an aspect to the role that was easy to fall into because I had things to compare it to. But at the same time, there was a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And I think I was quite fortunate in that the environment that I fell into was an easy environment in which for me to learn those things.
Do you think that is your style quite? Do you think you still influence over like direct?
I'd hope.
Guess?
Yeah, I'd hope that is definitely more. It's always been my style, is trying to influence it rather than be that direct
Just go do
person.
it. Yeah, I want this to be done.
It's definitely not. Definitely not that I want this to be done person.
Banging on your table. And
definitely
finger
not
wagging.
me. So yeah, it's very much a case of trying to. I think the change for me has been, especially as I've been moved up the management ladder, for want of a better phrase, is changing that style, or to be. As a technical architect or as an engineering manager, you have more of a direct input into a team, into what a team is producing. Yeah. But as you sort of move away from that, you have to start asking those questions to sort of try and steer them to where you want them to go effectively, while also giving them some clear direction in terms of, as a team, this is what we're trying to achieve. So yeah, I think it's been more of a case of switching from that short term, this is what we're doing, to that longer term, these are the goals that as a group we're working towards. And that's been definitely a focus, and recently, is to try to give people more of a, I don't like the term sort of North Star metric or whatever, but that sort of set of goals of, right, okay, as a team, this is what you're working to. There's a team, that's what you're working to. Here's what, this is generally where we're going. And also providing more visibility on that.
That's really good. And so when you have been like managing people in the team, I guess the architectural leadership aspect of things is quite funnily, I guess you could say, is quite problem solving. Yeah. Right. So you're kind of like, you're taking problems, you're trying to come up with solutions to the problems, and therefore you're kind of like system designing, or trying to work out the gaps and what solves what.
And how to transition from one thing to another.
And exactly. So I can kind of make sense. I guess when you've then come into a team, delegating that, I guess, to the team, how easy was that in general? Like, I guess, because you obviously want, everyone's got biases too. So you're going to always bias, me included, as every leader, you kind of see something, you'll always have a bias to that feels like the thing to do. And obviously then other people have different perspectives, and you can kind of, but how have you found that in terms of getting to the right outcome based on the goal, but then not influencing it, I guess not biasing too much for like the answer you've got in your own head of what you think it might be? Or could you do that as a manager? I don't really know what the dynamic was, to be honest.
I guess when I joined as an engineering manager, I stayed very hands-on. So I stayed very much, I kind of adopted the role that I was doing as a lead engineer at Zen, in that one of the team. So rather than being a hands-off manager, I was very much with the team, doing work with the team, understanding the problem areas and understanding the things. And then in terms of guiding, it became, you're just one of those people. One of those people, that sounds wrong. One of the engineers. One of those people. One of the engineers. So you can work with them and you can influence them at that level. And we built up I definitely respected all of them, and I hope they respect me and still do and whatever. But it's a case of, as a team, you can work towards that. I'm quite open in that I do have opinions on things, but I tend not to be very strong with those opinions. And especially going into a new environment where obviously I could look at what I'd done in Zen, and obviously I had biases as to what was right or what was wrong about those type of things. So it's a case of going in and trying to go, okay, how do you do things? And understanding the reasons why they do things. Yeah. And sort of allowing that flow to continue until you get an understanding of why something is happening or why you're going in a certain direction. And then once you've established that understanding of why, then you can start asking the questions. Yeah. Of, well, what about this? Or does it do this? Or no, it doesn't do that. All right, well, do we need it to do that? Okay, right. And then you start changing that sort of guiding it towards what you think, but effectively with almost like checks and balances that it's the right thing to do. Because you've not just come in and gone, this is the thing we should be doing, let us all go and do this. Yeah. You've effectively looked at what is being done, looked at the reasons why it's being done, and then worked from there towards what is right for the team, what is right for the company. And sometimes that might not be where you thought it was originally going, but you've at least used that experience and that bias, for want of a better term, to effectively guide you to hopefully a better path for the team.
Yeah, so then when you've been managing the team and like kind of working together on like goals and then trying to work out the next path, I guess unraveling the bigger whys, like why are we even doing the things that we're doing. How have you followed the industry from like Zen, which has been, I guess, quite a different proposition in some ways, because you're saying it's more service based. So it's been a bit more like we're providing services to customers, more operationally led, I suppose, rather than engineering, like traditional development engineering led, to kind of retail, online retail, really. That's quite a shift. How did you find that shift on the dynamics of the team? And like you were saying before, you've got like productivity of the developers and how effective are they, and are they shipping things easily? Do they have everything they need? Was that quite a shift?
It wasn't really a shift because of the area that I dropped into. So Tech Foundations, or enablement as we now call it, our customer is effectively the engineers within the product space. Yeah. So we are effectively providing a service level type experience, but internally rather than externally. Yeah. So for me, there wasn't a great shift. I mean, it might have been very different if I dropped into a product team as an engineering manager. Yeah. But dropping into that sort of enablement space was very much this is familiar territory.
Yeah. So I guess then, that customer centricity
just transfers.
Yeah. And was that, I guess it sounded like the team that existed there had that mentality anyway, based on the titles.
Yeah, absolutely. So it wasn't a case of I came in and fixed everything. Absolutely not. It was working incredibly well when I arrived, and then we just iterated from that.
So there wasn't like crying devs.
No, none of that.
Like no one listens to me.
We had some very good. We've gone at Moonpig. We've gone through a replatforming experience. So we've gone from everything on-prem to a lift and shift into AWS, and then a complete replatform onto serverless architectures. Wow. So by the time I got there, that serverless architecture piece was pretty much well established. Right. So from a developer experience perspective, it was already in a very good place when I arrived.
That's really cool, actually. So do you, I guess all that standardization around things, it was already kind of, so you've basically gone very cloud native. Yep. On like leveraging like serverless technologies, API gateways, I guess burstability of it all, isn't it? Really?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, based on the nature of our business, that's where the value
makes the most sense. And then I guess then, because you were talking about the AI stuff, that integration and that type of service, supporting like the demand for the businesses on certain services like AI, has that been easy? As in like, because that's quite a different type of service even, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we are leveraging effectively as a service APIs.
Yeah.
So, you know, we haven't got to a stage where we're really needing to consider that on a massive scale.
Yeah, like doing your own models or something.
Yeah, I mean, we've toyed with it or looked at it, and I think
Yeah.
I like finger in the air estimated that to train our own model on our code base would be like a ridiculous, like 6-figure sum on like EC2 infrastructure kind of thing. Probably cheaper elsewhere. No, we like it. We have a very good relationship with AWS. But yeah, training your own model is expensive.
Yeah, very expensive and a lot of
Very
compute.
expensive.
Not about the product team though. Would they not want to leverage that, as in like, I don't know, training it on customer data and things like that, as in like...
We have a very, I don't know the full details of this, but we have a very well-established data science team.
Yeah.
So even before the AI banner came out, as everyone knows it today, internally within Moonpig, it's, you know, data science is something that has been heavily leveraged over the years. So yeah, there's definitely good work that's been going on in that space already before LLMs and everything else.
And you haven't become an on-prem, went to the cloud and up, because everything goes in silos. It's quite funny because basically you kind of see everyone be like massive flag wavers for cloud.
Yeah.
And then everyone goes to cloud, and then you'll kind of have a new uprising, which is like, oh, we should go back to on-prem. Everyone back into the data center. Oh my God, it's so expensive. This is crazy. Why do we do it? Blah, blah, blah.
We probably do an entire podcast just on that.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting one because it depends how you look at the numbers. I think is what it comes down to, is that like most things in life, statistics, finance can be read however you want to read it.
Yeah.
And you probably could hope, it depends, to be fair, it depends on your workloads, but you probably could get it cheaper if you run it yourself. But how far do you go into that, factoring in the costs of things like support and engineers and everything to do with that? I don't think it's quite as cut and dry as people seem to think in that area.
Yeah, doing the math on like the unknowns that are really hard to quantify. Like if you manage to get to market quicker and you turned profit and you grew your user base because of the enablement of those cloud native services, you can't really quantify how long that would have taken you without those services, and then what the risk would have been.
Exactly.
So it's never quite, if you're just looking at numbers on a spreadsheet and then you're looking at just literally bare bone cost comparisons in a really simple lens, then obviously you can look at it through that lens, but it's not quite as reflective as reality. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, coming from an ISP background, they obviously had a lot of tin because the nature is you've got data centers, you've got co-location suites, that's your product. So you're going to use your own thing. And although Zen at the time was adopting AWS and moving in some things into AWS, there was still a lot of infrastructure that ran on-prem. And I've seen SAN failures and the havoc that has come from entire VMware clusters having issues because of the SAN's got some broken disks. And, you know, personally, I don't want to go back there. That feels like somebody else's problem.
Yeah, it does feel weird in some ways to kind of revisit all those issues, all those storage issues, replication issues, all the security constraints around all of that, like all the resiliency you've kind of got to do. I mean, it is, I mean, not like it, you know, I'm sure maybe for some it makes sense. But it is odd that kind of comes up quite a lot as like, you know, a new thing. And then designing for development, you know, what's that DevX look like? You know, because you've got all these competing things where people talk about DevX, you know, velocity, productivity. And at the same time, you kind of hold these other competing things, like people being like, oh my God, the cloud's expensive, they get on-prem. And so there's a lot of talk, I guess, in the market, in the industry about a lot of things. It seems it's got way more complicated from, you know, ISP days when it was like there wasn't much choice.
There was a data center down the road.
There's a data center down the road, exactly. You paid for the service. It was a managed service. Colo was like another thing you could kind of do, but it was very simple. in terms of the outsource model. But now it's like quite wild how many things there are. Yeah.
I mean, so many cloud providers, so many services within those cloud providers.
Yeah.
Obviously, the difference between the offerings. I think if it'd be interesting. So obviously, I've been in a situation where coming into Moonpig, they were obviously well on the path with their AWS journey, and even at Zen, we were going on that sort of AWS journey. But I remember the debates at Zen over containers versus lambdas, and I think if I was to start that process today with a company who, they have everything on VMware in a cupboard somewhere in the office, got that sort of transformation from that to AWS today, I don't even know where I'd start. Not even AWS, sorry, just look at a cloud provider. What is right for that company? There's probably so much more offerings out there these days.
Yeah,
I can imagine as a marketplace, it'd be a nightmare to effectively navigate.
And what's your opinion then of the market as a whole? Because obviously, we were talking briefly before, and I find it, obviously my opinion's a little bit kind of like, why is it still so hard? How can you have so many things in the market that independently have like huge value? So you kind of like hear about all these different things, and as services are like massive value adds, but then the recognition of the value, like delta between the developer and the recognition of the value in the cloud, is so vast and so complicated, and so many decisions that kind of have to be made. And if you make the decisions incorrectly at the beginning, the cost can be really hard. Like the cost is high and it's really hard to repair.
Yeah.
Like everyone's using the same Amazon account. We're going to use VPCs to separate everything out, and you get into all the limits, madness, and tagging and costs and all this other stuff. And then they'll kind of come back later, and then the well-architected frameworks come out. Oh, no, you need to all have your own accounts, and it needs to look like this, and it's like account factoring and isolation and all these other things. So it's always changing anyway. But for me, I find it a bit bizarre that if you're a company, just like I'd literally just want to ship some software. Do you know what I mean? That's all I really want to do. Like, why is it so hard just to ship software?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to, again, maybe it comes down to aspects of scale, sort of, and skill set to some degree. So, if you're just a small company on a cloud adoption journey, then it makes 100% sense to effectively leverage products to effectively get you on that journey quicker.
Yeah.
But I think it then becomes a scale thing of, I think it's probably skill set driven to some degree. And do you have the skill set internally to effectively support some of that adoption? So within our space, we have that skill set there. So for our own deployments, we have a lot of basically things that we built in-house to support that developer journey, to try and ease that. We've got Terraform templates and things like that. And for us, that works well, effectively. But if you were doing it from scratch and you didn't have that same support area to build out from, then utilising something more off the shelf to get that time to market quicker, effectively. Yeah. There's definitely an argument for that kind of thing.
Are the engineers, the developers, are they quite, I'm guessing at Moonpig, is the caliber quite high?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess then if they're engineering-minded developers, because you can get different, it's a bit, I don't know if it's harsh, but you can get developers that only just care about developing.
Yep.
And they learn a language and they can be really good and effective in that language. And you can get engineering style developers who like solving engineering problems and find lots of engineering interesting, not just necessarily coding, and they can pay interest to cloud and other ancillary technologies that are kind of around. So I guess the model is predicated probably on what you've got to work with.
I think so,
yeah, as well. So I guess if that's the case, what your team and the dynamics of then their caliber, is that more supporting? As in, like, is it more of a is it okay for them to learn Terraform and the Terraform templates? Do they show an interest in that, or do you have to feel like you have to abstract away where like no dev is going to really want to be learning Terraform?
I mean, that is an interesting, I think where we are at the moment is, I don't think there's value in, and I think this maybe comes down to your point of effectively what there is out there. I mean, if you look at the larger, the big companies, the Ubers and the things, and you read into it, they have their own command line interfaces for creating out a solution and things like that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. We're not at that stage. We're at the stage of we use these open source applications effectively, and this is the standard in which to use them.
Right.
So it's more of an educational piece. So yeah, for us, there is an expectation that an engineer within a product space should know how to at least utilize Terraform. They might not know the ins and outs of the providers and how to use it, but it should be at least relatively straightforward for them to take effectively a template and use that as a basis on which they can deploy something.
Right. And is your team then a service they consume as a support?
Yeah,
thing
effectively.
Around it?
They're more of an enabling team in that they'll effectively go and, so for the sake of an argument, say they're doing some work with pipelines and deployment pipelines. We have a team within our developer experience team who are very knowledgeable in that area, and they will provide consultancy and upskilling and basically trying to push that knowledge and experience into those teams as well.
Right.
Just to, again, based on more of that sort of you build it, you run it type of mentality of we see it as a team needs to know how their software is deployed as well as how it is built.
But they won't be embedded in the team.
No, they'll provide a consultancy. They'll go and
but they're
work
not like a
with the
permanent
team,
resource.
not a permanent resource, no.
Right. And then so they don't disappear off.
No, you won't. It's not in case you disappear for 6 months.
Yeah. You're like, what happened to them?
Yeah, it's more a case of I'm going to go work with this team today to help them with this thing, and then they're back again. And you're running that team as our developer experience team, which was my old direct team. They'll be working on as a team stand-ups, as you might expect, working towards common goals, but then providing that consultancy, that support to those other product teams.
Right. And do you think, like, do you see yourself as a platform? And do you see yourself as a platform team? Would you classify? I don't even know if you classify yourselves as that, or it's a bit semantical /
it's a bit
marketing terms. And
personally, I see a platform team as someone who has a product which the other teams utilize.
Yeah.
And we do have aspects of that within some of our teams. So there are certain core applications which are utilized by the other teams, be it the website, be it GraphQL things, where they are maintained and extended by teams within our area. So those teams, I would say, are providing more of a platform experience to those. They're providing something which is utilised by them. But we also have teams like DevX, who I think are more an enabling team, although they provide out, say, and sort of responsive GitHub goes down, for example, and they'll provide templating and things like that out. There isn't a core thing that they build.
Yes, they're not engineering software.
Yeah, they're not engineering
for
software.
their users.
They're more setting best practices and guiding out those best practices. So at that point, I think they're more of that enabling function. They're working with a team to help them solve a problem, and upskilling the team in that area, and then they'll leave that team effectively to it once they've got that skill set there.
Nice. And what's your, I guess for like head of engineering for your area, does that encompass the development, or is it more on the, what's the scope of the role for you?
So there's 5 teams. There's our web enablement team who look after things around the Moonpig website and that sort of shared code base that is contributed to by multiple teams. So they operate more in a platform space, but they also have the design system in there as well. There's an observability team who look after logging, monitoring, alerting. So although they provide those sort of platforms out, they're not really software platforms. They're more the OpenSearch cluster, the Grafana dashboards.
Right.
And they provide, again, best practices and templates and education on how to use those things. Developer experience, which is all around developer tooling, CI/CD, our backstage service catalog, anything around that to bring, and to sort of, developer metrics and things like that. Our orphan security team who provide out the customer so that is more of a platform, so that's the customer authentication platform. So that's provided as a service effectively to the other product teams who might utilize it, and then our infrastructure enablement team who look after everything to do with AWS as well as some of the core platform systems.
Right, so they'll be like the infrastructure team more the Terraform.
Yeah,
like
so they'll sort of set out
services.
Terraform and things like that. They look after sort of the permission sets and how our multiple. So we are in the lots of AWS account land.
Yeah.
So
Landing zones. Did you do that?
No, we've not done landing zones. I think there's a couple of things where we've rolled our own, because a lot of the services when we started this,
a bit immature,
very immature, sort of 3-4 years back.
Yeah.
So we were quite ahead on some of those things. So we have quite a bit of bespoke systems around that kind of area to enable those things. But yeah, things like control tower and things like that we don't utilize.
Yeah.
But maybe could if it has the features that we have. And things. So
it's got an API now.
Yeah,
didn't even have an API.
No, exactly. They're all relatively not immature, but yeah, they're maturing basically.
Yeah, and so I guess all those teams then, how do you align the common, because they're all quite different?
Yeah.
What's the common goal? I guess the alignment. How do you manage how all those teams are aligning? Because they've all got slightly different. I guess they've all got slightly different objectives.
Yeah, they've all got completely different goals and what they're delivering or what they're focusing on. For me, it just comes down to, and maybe this is something I should take away and actually do, because this is probably the one thing we don't have, is we probably don't have a common like mission statement or something like that, but maybe we should, because at the end of the day, the way I sort of summarize it is, as enablement teams, our job is to make the product teams' lives easier.
Yeah.
Reduce the cognitive load on them, make it easier for them to ship software, make their jobs easier basically. So I think maybe we should have some sort of common mission statement we can look at. But yeah, that's kind of the general alignment, I think, across the teams.
And have you ever got it, because I've spoken about this a few times before, around how complicated it can be to kind of measure like how effective you are when you're kind of downstream, because I guess you're the result of the impact of others, but that's quite grey of like...
Yeah, there's many input metrics that could affect one output metric.
Yeah, exactly. So it's quite a challenging place, and obviously there's all these newish developer productivity frameworks, like Smart, and then there was Dora and all this Space. Yeah. But I guess, did you adopt any of those? Have you kind of looked at any of those, or?
It's definitely something that's on our radar, and it's something that our developer experience team is sort of actually working towards. We have, Dora metrics established as at a high level, but they're kind of, I don't think it's unfair for me to say that they're our first attempt at them, and there's something that could be iterated on. But with a lot of the metrics, it's about being able to expose that effectively the metrics out from whatever you're doing. So from your tooling, be able to measure lead time to change. How do you do that? Oh, right, well, we use this as a proxy initially, but actually realistically, we need this thing to emit an event so that we can measure these things. So I think there's stuff we're building out there, but I think it's a case of utilizing the metrics that are useful for you to be able to show whatever you're trying to show.
Yeah.
At the moment, we're not building them out with a mindset of justifying the existence of enablement or anything like that. It's more a case of having a baseline against which we can measure.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is so many input variables that could affect those.
It's hard.
It's very hard to attribute that to the one thing, especially when you've got 7 things changing at the same time. It's not very scientific.
Yeah, we did. We rolled out OKRs for our I think maybe 3rd time where we've kind of tried to roll them out. And I kind of went a bit of a rampage listening to podcasts as well, the podcasts on OKRs, and people basically absolutely hating them and being like they're absolute waste of time. Why are we doing this to ourselves? And then other people saying that obviously it's almost a bit biblical almost. But the thing I liked about it was the key result part, which is you make people think about impact. So the only reason I like OKRs really isn't so much the religious aspect of it. It's the fact that you need to think about what defines success on the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And generally in our space, most people don't know. So if you go and ask them, especially in engineering, and especially if you're downstream, probably easier a little bit for product teams, where like, oh, we ship this feature, or it reaches the deadline, or there's like our code quality's gone up, or we're shipping smaller features more frequently. There's probably more to it. But when you're in the, I guess, enabling developers, and you're more downstream of it, and you're doing the supporting things, then that's harder, but still important, I think. But it's hard because it's so hard. You're like, well, we're still going to do, this is the thing that ends up happening, but we're still going to still do the same things anyway, whether we measure it or not, because we know they're the right things to do. So it can feel like a pointless exercise for a lot of people. And you're just like, all we're doing is talking about the things we know we need to do. Let's just do the things and then unblock ourselves. But then you can't really say what impact it had. So it's a bit of a dichotomy, I think, for a lot of teams when they adopt them. So I don't know how, like that, in my experience, that's kind of what ends up happening is conversations. But
yeah, I think from where we are, so our product teams are very OKR focused, and I'm probably not the most close enough to that to actually sort of comment on it. But what we've done from an enablement perspective is establish, because effectively we can see the product teams and how they ladder to OKRs and how they ladder to company goals. With an enablement, that's harder. Yeah. It's harder to ladder through that. So the approach we've taken as a starter is just to simply establish goals, which effectively have those key results.
Yeah.
So it is, be it, improve site, I'm just making this up, improve site performance by 20%, or deliver this bit of functionality by this date. And we're starting small with it. So we're just starting it as rather than what has happened in the past, which is enablement have been effectively left to their own devices. We've been building out the right things, but we've not been talking about it. So we've gone, okay, what are we working on? What are we working towards? How do we measure the success of that thing, be that a deliverable by this date, or be that a metric has been changed?
Yeah.
So I think at the moment when we're reflecting the goals, we've got quite a lot of deliver by X date. We've not got a huge amount of move this metric.
Yeah.
And that's probably because we haven't built those metrics out. So I think you probably have to establish, for at least for us, we need to establish those metrics so then we have something to talk about.
Yeah, no, that does make a lot of sense. I think that's probably the key thing I've learned as well from it, going through it a few times, is there's difference between BAU, business as usual stuff, and then trying to change something in the company. And I think if you're trying to change something in the company different to like what you've just got to do as a job, then I think that's OKRs. Now, when you start getting into OKRs and you've got to measure the key results, you then realise that most teams also don't have BAU metrics. So then you don't know what you need to change because you're not necessarily measuring something. So just by going on the cycle of it, you start to put things in place where you're like, well, actually, if we need to get better, we need to kind of measure, which is kind of where you're at. And it's like, how do we start measuring, which is the first thing to get out of the way? And I think if you get that out of the way, then the data leads the strategy, because you're like, okay, now we actually know.
Yeah, and you definitely have to be data driven for it to make any sense. Otherwise,
yeah, exactly.
How do you know you're achieving anything?
Yeah, exactly. But it's quite easy to fall into the bias of like most people, and they might not be wrong, but you're like, actually, we know what we need to do, whether we're measuring it or not. You kind of like instinctively know, or the industry's telling you these things, and you've spoken to other people qualitatively. But it's just interesting, especially when you get into like teams of teams, which is kind of what you're in. So that's kind of interesting around the doing goals, start to put some metrics in place.
And I think it's a scale thing. Because I think, like you say, when you just say one team, you kind of know what you got to do.
Yeah.
And you're sort of accountable to yourself. But then as you sort of scale that out, you need to try and put something around that to know that you're all working at least on the right thing.
Yeah. So what's I guess do you think is for you for the next couple of years in the role? Do you have other kind of career progressions beyond this, or are you like content with where you are? Or?
I think I'm content with where I am for the time being. I think it's one of those things of, as you move from managing sort of individual contributors, especially where you've been one of those and you have a lot to draw on, it's for me anyway, it was relatively straightforward to drop in to be able to progress them. As you move up and you become a manager of managers, and that becomes a different skill set. And I think that's something that I definitely have probably more time to sort of develop in myself.
Yeah, like leadership goals. And do you think there's a difference between like leadership and management?
I mean, definitely, because it's like I say, as a technical architect, I was very much a technical leader. So from a leadership perspective and trying to sort of see a vision to more like day-to-day kind of, I don't know, with reporting is not the best word, but yeah, there's definitely a difference there. And I think you can be a manager without that much leadership, but I don't know if you'd make a great manager.
Right.
I think for me, a good manager has that aspect of management and that aspect of leadership.
Can take people to somewhere. Yeah. And obviously we're kind of coming to the end, and I was going to try a new thing, which is like to ask a question in general, which is if you could change anything in the industry. So if you had a magic wand, or if I was a genie, even like a DevOps genie or an industry genie.
I don't think we can steal other podcasts. Genie things.
Yeah. What would it be? Like, what would you? If you could make a magic wand and change something, what would you change, if anything? It's a tricky question.
It is a real tricky question. I think for me, it's probably about discoverability of what's out there. So, an industry kind of recognized thing is go look at Gartner quadrants. And that seems to be, a way that is established within the industry of trying to see where the market leaders are, the front runners are.
Yeah.
And that obviously is relatively biased towards more established, larger companies quite often, although you get some sort of smaller companies in there.
Yeah.
I think having some way of finding all of that, I want a ITSM solution, or I want a CRM platform, having some way to more easily discover that in a more, not unbiased, but in a more open way, is probably something I think that would be incredibly valuable. And I guess there probably is stuff out there, and I've never just found it. But yeah, I think the discoverability, if we could magically wave a magic wand and you could find the right things that you want, I think discoverability is quite often the hardest part.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think now most people don't trust vendors anyway, because obviously they're going to tell you they're the best.
Yeah, everyone tells you the best.
Everyone tells you they're the best, and actually it's more referrals of like people that are using it, but that's quite hard.
Yeah, customer references is incredibly useful.
Exactly, but it's quite hard to find because a lot of people aren't as open, especially with technology because of the security angle and things like that. So there isn't always this huge amount of transparency on what people are like using. So yeah, that actually would be a really good one. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the really podcast and really appreciate it. So, thanks again, everyone, and speak to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.